Good afternoon. Just as a quick aside, commenting on last thing that Matt was talking about, is I served as chairman of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And in this area, the authority has exclusive rights and responsibilities for who comes on and who goes off of their airport as public vehicles for hire. But there's an interstate organization that actually sets the rates. And Dulles Airport is a closed airport. You can't pick up out there unless you're one of their franchised vehicles. National is an open airport. Any licensed vehicle from a surrounding jurisdiction can pick up and drop off in that. So, but we have, my commission, the DC Commission, has nothing to say about what happens to those cabs or what they engage in when they're on that airport property. We do set the rate. And the interstate agency agreed that the interstate rate they agreed to was the one we set. So that's how it works here. I don't know. I think most other jurisdictions, the airport belongs to the municipality or to the state, but here it's an interstate compact, which makes it different. You know, as I couldn't help thinking that over the years, I've gone to a lot of conferences that end up late Saturday afternoon. And we used to have a word or description for the people who attended those conferences. They were divided into chickens and pigs. And the ones who stayed through the last session late Saturday before it was all over were the pigs. And you have to understand why. And I tell it why through a story. It's the story of the chicken and the pig who were walking down the road together. And they passed a restaurant that said, "Special today, ham and eggs." And the chicken said, "Isn't that nice, the way they honor our products?" And the pig said, "That's all very well for you to say. Yours is a contribution. Mine's a total commitment." So I appreciate all of you making the total commitment to stay here through late Saturday. This is a panel dealing with where regulation is and where regulation may go. Now, I have to make one other thing before I start with a couple of comments and then call on the people. It's a confession that when Alan started talking, my head kind of nodded off for a minute. And when I snapped to and heard him talking about a description of an area and the taxi service and the people's attitude, and I thought I was for sure he was talking about Washington. But luckily I snapped to and realized it was Australia. But I have a suspicion that there's a lot of places all across the globe that are going through exactly the same thing that we're going through here. Just to give you a little idea of what I found 16 months ago when I assumed this position at the request of my mayor. And I found deteriorating vehicles, disgruntled drivers, failing dispatch systems, disrespect in the community for the commission, drivers gaming the system, cash-only payment option, cultural attitudes resulting in assaults on women, illegal drivers and poaching, lack of adequate funding for the commission, and those were the minor problems, or those were just a few minor problems on that. Since then, however, we've done a lot of review, a lot of thinking, and would have been much farther ahead if we hadn't run into a protest in the award of a contract to bring in what we were calling our taxi smart meter system that would introduce credit cards, GPS, driver verification, passenger and driver safety. All of that has been held up. And if we hadn't had to protest, every one of our 6,500 cabs would have that system installed by the 15th of November, so you would have had an entirely different experience when you came here. But in the process of moving as to how to, one, get the commission to gain the confidence and the respect of the community, and get the community and our visitors to respect the service and enjoy the service of the taxi cab system, we've had to look at an awful lot of issues and problems. Not among those is that our system changed dramatically beginning in about mid-1980s. Prior to that, almost all the drivers in our taxi cab fleet were native-born Americans, about half of them African American, and about half of them were European American. Most of them were in their 40s, 50s, and early 60s. And they had an attitude about their role that was akin to some of the restaurants where the waiters really look upon themselves as high-class professionals. Well, those drivers began to retire as the 80s came upon us and as they started getting up there. And their children were all going to law school, medical school, dental school, accounting school, and had no interest in following their parents into being drivers. And so there was a great absence of a market pool of drivers here at a time when we were getting an increased amount of immigration. And they were replaced then by individuals coming from mostly at first the Mideast, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, followed by then Pakistanis, Indians. Then we began to get immigrants coming in from Africa. Today, 40% of our drivers are Ethiopian. Many of them are now American-born, having reached the age in which their parents were the immigrants, and they are following into the taxi system. Not only individually as drivers, but they're becoming the owners of the companies. We have a very complicated system here. I have 116 recognized taxi companies that we oversee, and I have approximately 1,500 to 1,800 what we call independent operators. And these are individuals who do not affiliate with any company, but either drive a black or a white cab, and they are totally on their own. Even in the companies, about 2/3 of the drivers who affiliate with those companies actually own their own vehicle. The result is we have a very inefficient system as far as return on value of the vehicles that they're using. And we have a concentration of service in the high market areas. At any given time during morning through evening rush hour, we'll have about 2,000 taxis on the street. The vast majority of them in the Connecticut Avenue corridor, the Wisconsin corridor, Georgetown, DuPont, because that's where the major ridership is, and they're fighting and competing for that. In the meantime, no one is cruising in the remainder of the city, and it becomes very difficult to get service in those areas. The condition of the cabs, the attitude of the drivers, all of this has brought us to a terrific re-examination as to just what is regulation. I have over 1,000 pages of regulations that I inherited that have been collected since 1985 when the commission was started. Much of it, as I look at it, frankly, as a non-bureaucrat, seems to me to be useless in terms of being able to do the principal job as we see it. As the regulators in Washington, we view that from the law, our responsibility is the safety of the passenger, the safety of the driver, and the protection of the consumer in terms of paying a fair price for the services that are delivered. But it gets a little more complicated because the law does have, and has been changed enough in the last year, that we're now also responsible for ensuring that the industry itself is economically successful, and that we are responsible for the relationships between companies and the companies and their drivers. That's brought a whole new view on things. At the same time, a year ago, when we first considered and decided to move ahead on our TSMS system, we had only one electronic reservation app available in Washington, and it did not at that time accept credit cards. As of today, we have 6, and they all accept credit cards. It's changed the whole nature of the technology that's available to improve service for the people who want to use public vehicles for hire. And it's raised a big question about how we deal with companies versus independent operators, and we see it as actually on a collision course. And I can't tell you at this point how we're going to address it, but I don't think we can have a conflicting public policy in which on the one hand says, let's encourage individuals to take their own private vehicle and get it licensed and get themselves licensed and ride around as a person offering a ride in a public vehicle. At the same time, mandate that companies who have 20 or more vehicles under common management must have a central dispatch system, and 5% of all their vehicles must be wheelchair accessible. And as I said the other day, wheelchair accessible defined for us is a motorized vehicle, not a fold-up. So we're dealing with that, and we're dealing with that at a time that I'm convinced that in the next 2 or 3 to 5 years at the most, it will be a rare sight when you see somebody standing on the corner going like this to hail a cab. I think individual hailing is a endangered species, and almost everybody using public vehicle for hire will be using an app of some kind to call their ride. That also is a challenge to how we regulate that. How tight do we regulate it? How loose do we regulate it? We've made the initial decision to encourage all the companies that want to come in and offer apps. But now we're reviewing how we regulate that, how we ensure that the customer and the driver both are treated with fairly. So my view is that technology is moving ahead so fast that regulatory process, at least the one we use, is having a hard time catching up with it. There's going to be changes in the next 2 to 3 years that will make what we're talking about today look like we were in the last century. And that's the challenge that my fellow moderators have got to address here as they all come up and make their presentations on their views of where we're going in this field. So with that, Karen will tell me who my moderators or my panelists are.